Welcome. My name is Søren. I come from Denmark. I work for OCI. I've been doing so for the past 5 months or so. I'm also a conference organizer in Denmark where I organize GreatConf Europe. So it's nice getting out and see how other conferences are doing and supporting those as well. OCI is the home of Grails. You probably already know that. And if you need any help with your Grails projects, we're definitely there to help you guys. So who am I? I've been a Java developer for a lot of years. I joined the OCI team late last year. I have been a Groovy and Grails developer since somewhere around 2009. Started with Groovy 1.8-ish and Grails 1.2, I think. And my very first website was actually the GreatConf website, which I made together with Guillaume Laforge. And I'm very passionate about Groovy and Grails, and one of the reasons why I actually have created the conference. The co-founder, and I usually say that I'm 100% nerd, so if you call me nerdy, I don't mind. And of course I have to put a shameless plug in that if you didn't get enough Groovy and Grails content here, you should come to GreatConf. It's in the beginning of June, and Copenhagen is really nice in the beginning of June. So, I have a short agenda, and you'll notice that I have less slides and more demo, because I actually think coding live on stage is much more fun for you guys, and hopefully also more fun for me if the demo gods are with me. So I'm going to just talk about Grails. This is just another web framework, what is in the stack, and basically how does it work, and I'll show the last part by running a demo. So I am actually not going to do a Q&A, but you can stop me anytime. I cannot see very many of you because of the light, but speak up and I'll stop and listen what you have to say. So Grails. What is Grails? Well, it's a powerful web framework where you get a lot of productivity boosts out of the box, and it's also a very opinionated web framework, which means that things have to be in a certain folder to do what you want it to do. And then it integrates very well with the JVM. It runs Groovy, very nice. It has domain-specific languages for configuration, Log4j, not as much anymore in Grail 3. It has an ORM that can be object relational mapper that can be used with Hibernate or MongoDB or Redis or other data stores. It supports metaprogramming and some asynchronous programming. And I'm not going to go very deep into these parts. This is, after all, a very beginner's talk. So if, in the hope that that you will be more inclined to use Grails when we're done. So what is in the box? Well, it has the GORM layer for doing data manipulation. It can simplify Hibernate a lot. It also can be database agnostic, so you could, to some extent, exchange your data store from Hibernate to a NoSQL database, and it should not require too much work. It's a control layer built on Spring MVC. It uses Groovy server pages, the view technology. It has an embedded Tomcat, and it also runs Spring Boot. So you have a full development environment just by installing Grails. So you don't have to deploy your code to a external container to run it while you're developing. It reloads on the fly your artifacts, so if you add new artifacts or changes artifacts, you'll get reloading, so you don't have to restart your server all the time. On some occasions you have to restart the server, but the turnover time is not that big anymore. It uses Spring dependency injection. It has very good support for internationalization. That is actually what I18N stands for. It's I and 18 letters and an N. So it has a transactional service layer. It's very easy to create tag libraries. Have any of you tried creating tag libraries in Java? It's very cumbersome, and in Grails it's very easy. It also has a very well-defined plugin structure. However, the plugin structure between Grails 2 and Grails 3 changed dramatically, so you cannot use Grails 2 plugins for Grails 3 projects. But a lot of the very important plugins has already been migrated to Grails 3, and it's an ongoing process. There's also a command line tool and a build system based on Gradle. And that's different from the build system in Grails 2, which was on Gantt. So the Grails stack, well, it's all built on the Java virtual machine, which is very good. It's very performant. It's it builds on Java, obviously, and the JDK. Not much there. Then it builds on Spring Boot, a very lightweight container to boot up an application, and the Spring framework for dependency injection and model view control, and then Hibernate when you pick the default stack, and that's what we're going to work with today. So it's not like I'm going to go on a route to other data stores. And then of course Groovy, which is a very important part of Grails. And then you have the Grails layer on top of it all. This is the stack. There's two major principles in Grails. The one is dry. Anybody knows what dry stands for? Don't repeat yourself. We try to write code once and not do too much copy and paste. It's not all avoidable, but it's fairly easy in Grails. And we have a convention over configuration, which means that Grails has an opinion about where you put domain objects, where you put controllers, where you put tag libraries, and so forth. So if you don't put a controller in the controller folder, it is not a controller, basically. And then of course it builds on Groovy, and just have this very short slides on why Groovy is cool and excellent and amazing. This is taken from Wikipedia. But Groovy is also very powerful, has an opinion about, it optional type, dynamic, and it can also be statically typed. But we're not going to go very deep into this. But it is very important to know that Groovy is an integral part of Grails. So, to get started with a Grails project, there's one command that can create an app, and then you basically have an app that you can work on, and everything is wired up for you. So, and you get a nice structure, and I'll get back to the structure because this is a little bit small and hard to read. So, actually already here, I'm very close to having used all my slides. So I have about 30 minutes. So I'll see if I can spin up a Grails application and add some code to it. And I had a little bit of issues with the Wi-Fi, and I think everybody did. So Alvaro was so nice to borrow me his portable hotspot. So hopefully I can get things working as I want to. Just going to minimize this and bring out a command line here. So I'm going to make a folder called Greach, and I'm going to cd into it. And also I'm going to flip back and forth. I was hoping that I had all my my notes on my tablet, but because of the Wi-Fi issue, I didn't have time to copy it over. So I will have to switch back and forth to my my presentation notes. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully I can remember most of it by heart. So now we have a directory, very empty. I'm going to spin up the Grails. No, first of all, I'm going to show you a small tool. That is, if you have JVM on your class path, you're good to go. And most of you, since you're developers, hopefully do. And Java 7 or Java 8 both will do fine. Have any of you heard of SDKman? Good. For those of you who haven't, this is a very cool little tool, SDKman.io. SDKman is a small tool to handle your development tools like Groovy, Grails, Boot. It handles a larger and larger list of tools. And the cool thing is it's so easy to install. Let me just... You go to your... It has to be run from Bash. That's the only thing. So if you're a Windows user, do yourself a favor and install Cygwin. Or if you are a Windows 10 user, Bash is coming to you. You should be happy. So by this command, you will install SDKman, and I obviously already have that. And it puts a command on your command line called SDK. And here you have some various commands. So I can see SDK current. It will show me, I'll just do that again. It will show me what versions of my tools I have installed. And in this case, I have the latest Grails. You could also say SDK list Grails, and it will show you all the versions of Grails available to you. So if you're sitting on in a company with various Grails installations, versions, it's very, very quickly to switch between Grails versions. So if I want to use Grails, let's say I have a 253 project or 254, I would just say SDK use Grails 254 or 3. And now my default shell Grails in this shell, and only this shell, is Grails 253. So it's super snappy to get around. So I'm just going to go back to SDK 3.1.4, the latest Grails version. You should always live on the edge to be able to report back if you see any issues, so it can be fixed. So I'm going to run the Grails command. And Grails has an interactive console where you can do a lot of things. And right now, the directory is empty, so we have these commands available to us. Can you read this? Is it big enough? Good. So in Grails 3, we've started working with the concept of profiles. So you can actually make various profiles depending on what you want your application to do. In this case, we're just going to use the default web profile, but there's also list profiles. And you can see we have an Angular profile, a REST API profile. We also have abilities to create plugins and web plugins. There's a distinction between the plugin and the web plugin, is that the web plugin also has dependencies on various web framework things in Grails. But I'm going to create a plain Grails application. I'm not going to write Grails, it's already there. Create app. And then I can do, in this case, in place. And the reason I want to use in place is because I'm already in the directory. But if I wasn't in the directory, I could write create app and then the app name, and it would create a new directory and make the Grails structure in there. So let me just do this. And it will download a few dependencies, or actually just get them from my cache. So I can open the directory and here I can see my directory structure. Let's see if I can make this a little bit larger. There. There we go. So this is the Grails application. We can see we have a Gradle folder. That's where Gradle stores some of its stuff. We have the main folder, which is Grails app. We'll go into that in just a minute. We have a source folder, and the source folder can be used to store our main, where we have a Groovy, and we also have a web app where we can place resources that will go directly into, it could be an HTML file, for example, or a PDF file that we want to serve directly from our application. Then we have test folders for integration tests and for unit tests. And I'm not going to go very deep into tests. I'm just going to shortly show you that every time we create an artifact like a controller and the main object or the tag library, Grails will create a test class for the artifact. And the reason that it does this is that it thinks that it's very important to have tests for all your code, which is hard to not agree with. So back to the Grails application. This folder here has a number of other folders. So it does take configuration, convention over configuration, but we are not totally without configuration files. There is a configuration files for lockback, so that's our logging, and we have a YAML file for application configuration, and then we have one folder for configuring Spring Beans, and I'm not going to go deeper into that, but it's just letting you know that it's there. Then we have a folder for internationalization, and by default, Grails comes with translations into a number of different languages. So you have the Spanish translation, and I have a Danish translation, and the default down here is messages. In it is the folder that keeps the bootstrap. Bootstrap will execute when the container spins up, and if you have to do initializing of data or adding data to a data store or something, that can be done in Bootstrap, and I'll show you that in a little bit later. And then it has a folder called a file called application, and I'll always get back to that, but that is the main starting point for all Grails applications. Assets is images, JavaScript, and style sheets. We'll get back to that. Controllers contain controllers. Nothing in there yet. Oh, it's not quite true. There's an URL mapping. I'll also get back to that. Domain classes, no content yet. Services, no content yet. Tag libraries, for tag libraries. Utils, mainly made for codecs, if you have to make customized codecs. You can also put other stuff in there. I usually use source instead, source Groovy, and then use a few files there already by default, and we'll also get back to those. So that is basically a Grails app. And then we could code everything from a VI or another editor, but I do prefer using an IDE. So I'm going to make, the first thing I'm going to make, no, first I'm going to start our application. So I can make run app here. I just want to show you that I created the app, now I'm running it, and in a few seconds it should be ready and to take requests. And the console comes back and you are able to create artifacts and so on. So first I'm just going to show you that we have an application. So this is what you get out of the box. It tells you about what application status you have, what artifacts are there, and what installed plugins are there by default. And that some of them are always there and some of them are there because of the web profile. Okay, so let's start by creating a controller. Welcome. it creates two files, a welcome controller and a welcome controller spec, and then the reloader actually reloads the artifact for us. So when we go back to our front here, we should actually see an available controller to us. But if I click it, it will say there's no view name with that. So we have a controller, but we don't have a view yet. So let's just very quickly create files for IntelliJ. I can also call Gradle internal commands that I have in my Gradle projects from within the Grails console. So I'm just going to create the idea files. And then I am going to open oh, it spins up the wrong idea. Sorry. I have two ideas running, so I'm just going to use this one instead. So I'm just going to open the project, and it's projects, demo, Greach. Demos. There we go. Let me just go and quit this. So it will say it has an unlinked Gradle project, and I'm just going to import that, and everything should be good to go. Takes a few seconds, and now I have just view presentation mode. Again, the Grails application and controller and the welcoming controller. It says here I have an index, but I have no GSP. Can you see this up there? Or should I make it a little bit bigger? I'm just going to increase the font size. Hang on a second. That was not enough. It's still not very good, is it? Let me just see what I can do about the colors. That is better, right? Just 25. Well, I think we have to live with this. So back to the welcoming controller. Is that easier to read? Good. So IntelliJ just provides me with some shortcuts that I'm going to take advantage of. I want to make a GSP page. So now I have a GSP page, and I can say H1 welcome. And I go back to my window here, and now I have the welcoming thing. So that's very basic. The way to do it, it looks very plain, and you can ask where the graphics come from. So you can see there's a layout here, and that will tell you to where to go and get the layout. And we can go into the views folder here, and you can see the welcome and index. So the welcome and index corresponds with the welcome controller. So you have a controller name called welcome. You have a folder name called welcome. That's a convention. And also the convention is that you have an action called index. That action will look for a view called index.gsp if you don't specify that it should render something specific. So in this case, it will look for this GSP file. And then it weaves in the things into the main GSP. So this is actually the layout. So this is where the graphics and menu comes in. You can see down here we have something called layout body, and actually if we look at the page here, the welcome is kind of very far out to the side. That's because it would be a good idea to wrap this in a div with a class called container. That will make it a little bit nicer. Then it will pull it in as a container. It's Twitter Bootstrap in the background, so if you know Twitter Bootstrap, that will help you a lot. Okay, I'm gonna pick up speed because we don't have much time. So back to the welcome controller. I can also send data over to my view. I can do that by returning a model. So Greach. So now I put something in my model, and when I return a model, it will still look for a GSP page called index. And going back to the index page, I can say welcome and then say who, and that will grab information from the view model and display it in the view. So I have welcome Greach now. And I can continue down that path, but since we are very fast running out of time, I am going to show you a little bit more about the domain model. So an application is much more fun if we have some data to work with. So let's, in here we can create domain class. We are at a conference, so let's, we want to have a talk. Now we'll create a talk domain class, and by default it uses the application name as a package, so it doesn't end in a default package. And to add database columns to this, we could go and add properties, but first I'm going to show you that there's already some properties on a domain class. So there's a database console in all applications called DB console, which is enabled in development mode. It's not enabled in production, fortunately. And right now there's nothing in there. This is one of the places where you have to restart your application, so I am going to stop. One more time. Stop app. And then I'm going to exit here, and I want to run it in here instead. So I can go to my Greach and application and just write run application. It's a little bit easier to have it the same place. So now we'll spin up the application inside IntelliJ IDEA, but it's the same application. So if we go back to the database console here, every time I restart my application, I have to reconnect. And you can see now that I actually have a talk table. Let me just enlarge this a little bit. There we go. So by default, a table has an ID and a version field. We didn't add any properties, so it doesn't know what else to add there. But let's go here and say my talk should have a title, and it should also have a description to have something longer. So going back here, sometimes, and this is a little bit by random, it does add those on the fly, and sometimes it doesn't. And today I think we're in the case where it didn't. So I'm just going to restart my server. Better do that than wasting time. So restart this and connect and show the table. Now we have a description and a title, and the title is a varchar 250, and so is the description. So that's the default values, and it's not null. So how can we change that? Well, we can say that we want our constraints to say that with title, nullable is default false. I like to explicitly tell the other developers that that's my idea. So I usually write it even though it's default. And then I want max size to be 100 chars. And the description, true. So this looks a little bit weird. This is a DSL. So the DSL says create a talk, and then when Grails wires up everything, it will look in the constraints, and it will use metaprogramming in Groovy to find out there's actually a method here that looks like it's called title that takes named argument values of nullable and max size, and it will know how to handle that, and it will turn it into a Hibernate constraint in the background. And the same for this one here. So while we restart this, right now I get a description null, and that will the description will still be null true now, but it will still be 256 characters, and which is not enough for a description of a talk. So instead of writing a max size of 2,000 and get a varchar 2,000, now it would be nicer to put it into a text blob. So we can tell. I'll just quickly go here and show you what the status is now for the talk table. The description is still the varchar 250. Oh, come on. But it's not null anymore. So now it can be nullable. But we want to make it into a text blob, so we can use a static mapping and say that the description SQL type is equal text instead of varchar. I could also write varchar down here and say I want 1,000 or 2,000, but we don't want to allocate too much. So let's just final restart here, and meanwhile I'll go back to my presentation notes here. And let's just very quickly take a look at the database console again. Connect. And finally we can see that it's now a club. So that's the way we control database tables. So next thing is we want to be able to view what data we have. So let's just go ahead and, we can create what we call a scaffold controller. Greach .talk, and this will create a controller, a very small one called talk controller, and it only has one line that says scaffold equals to talk, and that means create everything that we need to actually show what's going on in the application. Let's just remove this, and we can see now we have a talk controller, and if we click it, we get a nice UI for entering data, so we can go in and make a new talk and say the advantages of Grails, and this is cool. So now we have a one talk, and we can show the talk list, and this is cool. And there's also pagination and search. So in instead of typing in a lot of data, I'm just going to very quickly show you how to do this in the Bootstrap. I have some code here. That will download some data from a URL. That's the Greach application, has a URL for loading data. And I'm going to use a JSON slurper. And when I restart my application, and if the demo got like me, I should be able to read in some data from this URL. So now the database, the data will take a little longer to load, and if it fails, I have the file on my system as well. Here we have it. And now we have the talk list, and we have pagination, and we have sorting, and we could actually go in and say, well, where's that code coming from? So we can go in and say, no, that's not it, sorry. I'm a little bit stressed here. Generate all has a command for that. These commands also works in the Grails console. This is just a shortcut. So Greach, talk, and now it will go and actually bring in the artifacts. It's not called talks. Let's just try that again. Talk, singular. Now it created the spec. It skipped the talk controller because it already exists, and then it makes views for me. So now I have the views available to me. Let's go down here in views and see if we have a talk, and now we have 4 views. So one is the index, and now that we have multiple talks, it would be nice if we were able to search these talks. So I'm very quickly going to copy some code in, and this code will actually be available as a GitHub project afterwards, so you can go and look at it. So the scaffolding code here only contains what I add extra. So it supports using the internal Grails scaffolding together with your own code. So if you're writing admin interfaces, you often don't need very much extra code. So what happens here? Well, I have to search the domain class talk. If we very quickly look at it, it doesn't have a method called find by title I like and count by title I like. But that's a synthesized method that Grails adds because it's a domain class. So, and then there's a very small change for the view as well. I'm just going to add to the index. Oops, wrong file. Up here. Where is it? Just in front of the table. So now if I go to my list here, I can say Groovy. Maybe the controller didn't reload. I know. And we decided that Q&A is something if they want to ask, so they can just interrupt me. Let me see if this one is running. It should have reloaded it, but it didn't. I have 4 more minutes, so I would have told you a lot more about tag libraries and services, but you're welcome. I will gladly sit down an hour and talk more about it at lunch or whenever you want, because yeah, time is running fast. Oh yeah, now it searches only talks that has Groovy in the title. So let me just see, where should we put our focus? So all the other scaffolded code, let me just bring that into view so you can see what it actually looks like. And I'm just going to copy this snippet, and then if I remove my controller and rerun the application, or rerun the generate all for talk, it will now see that my views are there and won't override them, but it will create my controller, so now I have a talk controller with all the code in it. So I'm just going to add my search here. So this is actually the code that Grails is using, and it's a very, very good starting point for creating your own applications, because it shows a lot of things that you can do with Grails. One of the things is that it uses the respond, and respond is very intelligent in the way that it knows what you're requesting. So if you're requesting JSON as a return type, it will actually return JSON for you. So let me just very, very quickly show you that in the view here. If we go back to index, and then if I say JSON, it will actually return the talks as JSON instead of a HTML view. And if I write XML, it will return XML instead. So this is a very, very fast way of getting started with some front end that needs XML or JSON. So yeah, Grails is also using various plugins when you're developing, and one of the plugins that it uses by default in the views here, I'm just going to very briefly introduce you to that. It's the Fields plugin, because you'll probably wonder how it manages to render the fields from the bean. But the bean that uses or the view uses something called the Fields plugin, and that will allow you to in one place tell how to render various types. So in this case, everything is rendered as a text field, but you'll actually notice that if we go to our talk index here and take the Groovy puzzlers, oh, that was a bad example because it doesn't have a description. None of them do. Oops, sorry. My reading in the data is not working as I expected. So I could go in and say, right now if I go into my edit, right now the description is a short file, and if I want this to be a text field instead of going in and writing a lot of GSP code, I could utilize the Fields plugin, and the Fields plugin allow me to make a folder here called Fields talk, and in here I could add a short GSP. Let me just find that very, very quickly. So I can define how my talk should be created. My description field. So if I add this and go back to my view here, no, the demo gods are not liking me right now. But the idea is that you can go in and define how should your fields look like, and you don't have to go into every single view, and if somebody decides that you need a new date picker, you don't want to go and find all the date pickers that you have. You want to be able to change it in one place, and the Field plugin provides that. I'm sorry I don't have any more time. Yeah. If you have questions, please come and ask. Thank you.